this interview, I sat down with an Episcopalian named Potter. I learned quite a bit from this interview, and a lot of my preconceived notions about the Anglican Church were changed, and I hope they do for you too. Please remember to keep an open mind and an open heart. All right, I'm sitting down here with Potter. He is an Anglican, and I found him on Reddit, and I think that we're going to have a pretty cool interview. So I'm just going to start off by saying, were you raised Anglican?
I was not, actually. I joined an Episcopal church, which is like an American Anglican church, when I was 16 years old.
What made you choose that?
So I wasn't raised religious at all, but when I became a Christian around when I was 16, and my family was a lot of Catholics, essentially, especially on my mom's side. So I tried to join the Catholic Church, and then I just couldn't get on board with some of the things they believe, especially about, like LGBT people, or the ordination of women. And so the Episcopal Church just really fit for me.
Do you consider the Episcopal Church to be more of a socially liberal church?
Definitely. Not everybody in it is, but it definitely leans that way.
Even compared to some other types of Protestant churches?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like what? Are there any dogmatic things that separate them specifically?
Just like in terms of social issues, or?
Sure.
Oh, well, so no, I would say that it follows the same basic trends as most mainline Protestant churches do. In that, we ordain women, we ordain, I think like the term when it happened was like actively gay pastors, but like, people in relationships, like same-sex relationships and marriages.
Right. They had to make that distinction because the Roman Catholic Church, I think they ordain homosexual priests, but so long as they're not like active homosexuals, I guess.
Yeah, in theory, although I don't even think they actually will ordain people, even if they're celibate, if they're gay. I don't know I'm not Catholic. I really don't know precisely what the rule on that is, but that's what I've heard anyways.
Are there any other theological differences with the Roman Catholic Church?
Well, that really depends on the Episcopalian you ask. I think we're Protestant, essentially, but there are some Anglicans and Episcopalians that will say, no, the Anglican tradition isn't a Protestant tradition. I think they're very wrong, but that's just me. So, yeah, in that we don't have a pope, I think is one unifying theological distinctive.
But do you still consider the church to be Catholic with a little c?
Yes, absolutely.
And what does that mean to be Catholic with a little c?
Right. So actually, I was just reading a book on this, and it was one of the archbishops of Canterbury that wrote it, Michael Ramsey. And he said that the church is Catholic not only because it is for all people in all places, right? That's one way that it's Catholic. But it's also Catholic in that the wholeness of the church is in each parish, right? So like it's the whole universal church is represented in each parish, the Episcopal Church, Catholic Church, Orthodox Church.
Well, that's really interesting. That actually separates it, a different type of Catholic than the big C Catholic Church, I guess you could say.
It does, yeah.
So do you have a problem with the Church of England or Anglican being called that, since you say you're an Episcopalian?
Not at all. So when I say that I'm Anglican, I mean that I am a member of the Worldwide Anglican Communion, which is kind of symbolically headed by the Church of England, right? So the Episcopal Church is the representative of the Anglican tradition in America, right? Just as the Anglican Church of Canada is said representative in Canada. And there's, other churches that go by Episcopal instead of Anglican within their countries. The Episcopal Church of Scotland being a big one.
What does the name Episcopalian mean?
So, Episcopal is an adjective that derives from the term for bishop. So, in Greek, bishop or overseer is episkopos, right? And so Catholics are Episcopal in that they have bishops, so are the Orthodox, so are Methodists. And then when we named ourselves the Protestant Episcopal Church of the United States of America when we were founded, because we were both Protestant and we had bishops, and that was kind of a distinctive thing. And the Scottish Episcopal Church is different from the Church of Scotland in that it has bishops. That's just the way it organizes itself. So that's what Episcopal or Episcopalian means.
Do you have good present-day relations with the Roman Catholic Church? the Episcopalian Anglican Church?
Depends. So, I work basically in a campus ministry at the College of William and Mary, and we're very close with like the Catholic campus ministry. But like on a national level, there's some very obvious reasons why we can't come closer than we're at. Like we can't really like celebrate communion together because the Catholics don't really like that we disagree with them on so much, I guess is the easy way to put that. So I mean, I'd say that it's cordial. It's not like we're going to be unified anytime soon, I don't think.
Right. You were telling me that you have an undergrad in Anglican theological and liturgical history?
No, it's more of a hobby than it is like an actual education.
Okay.
My education is more broadly in anthropology and religious studies.
Okay. What can you tell me about the liturgical history of the Anglican Church? Does the Mass have a different form than other ecumenical churches?
Yeah, it does. That's really something I'm very interested in. So it's really hard. It's very diverse. It's a diverse liturgical tradition, and it all goes back to like 500 years ago with the English Reformation. Thomas Cranmer was the guy in particular. He wrote up this thing called the Book of Common Prayer, which is just all the liturgies for the Church of England in that day in 1549. And he revised it once in 1552. The 1549 one was very similar to like the Roman Catholic Mass. Now it handled communion. And it took a lot from like the monastic traditions as well for like the daily prayer services. But the 1552 was much more reformed. It had a lot of people kind of putting in inputs on the earlier one. You know, for instance, Martin Bucer, this great reformer from the continent. Heinrich Bullinger, the successor to Ulrich Zwingli. John Knox, who would go on to reform the church in Scotland. And even John Calvin. So it definitely has a much more lower church, more Puritan kind of feel to it.
What does that mean, Puritan?
Well, yeah, so that is kind of a technical-ish word. So the Puritans, they really sought to reform the liturgy in the Church of England along more like Calvinist lines, essentially. So they, especially after like Queen Mary, like Bloody Mary, and the rise of Queen Elizabeth to the throne, the Puritans really wanted to replicate what they saw in Geneva when they were exiled. So they focused a lot on like policing personal morality, like the Genevan government did. They focused a lot on like sort of a low church, more extemporaneous, prayer life within the church, a lot more on preaching than on like liturgy. And so essentially they were just kind of a party within the Church of England that sought to advocate for that, both before and after Elizabeth was on the throne, and during while she was on the throne. And so they had a lot of influence on the early books of Common Prayer. But as time went on, we went through a few different kings in England. Those kings really did not like the Puritans. They really much preferred to have a stricter liturgy that was much more closer to kind of like the Roman Catholic Church and how it did things. And so after a lot of conflicts, essentially, even a civil war that started primarily over the issue of liturgy in the church, we end up with kind of the archetypal liturgy for the Anglican communion.
What were you talking about, the Civil War of Liturgy?
So the background for that was that in 1637, the current reigning king of England and Scotland, Charles I, basically with the Archbishop of Canterbury, drafted a Book of Common Prayer for use in the Church of Scotland, which already did not like being under the English king at that time, but like they were kind of Presbyterians. They're the precursors to the modern Presbyterians who follow in that Calvinist tradition. And so when this prayer book comes out and like the first Sunday they're using it, I think if I remember the story right, like there was one occasion where like the priest comes out in all this like vestments and everything, and one of the parishioners throws a chair at him. Like they really did not like these liturgical changes, and that started what was called the Bishops' War in Scotland, which the Puritans and Oliver Cromwell ended up making the English Civil War in England, deposing King Charles I.
So the liturgical civil war, was it a liturgical difference similar to what the Roman Catholic Church did in probably around 2013, 2014 with the Vatican II Council? Do you know anything about that?
The Second Vatican Council, like in the 60s?
Oh, was it that far long ago? Yes.
Yeah, it was in the 60s, but they did have a few more liturgical changes after that.
I remember when I was in high school, they had a few changes to the Mass. I guess I got those mixed up. So was it something similar to that? Because I know now we have these traditional Catholics who are seen in kind of a low light in the Roman Catholic Church, and like the pre-Vatican II. So is that kind of thing still around in the Anglican Church with that civil war, where there's like a liturgical divide?
In a very different way, yeah. So today we revised our liturgies in the Episcopal Church along the same lines that the Roman Catholics did at the Second Vatican Council. We just did it 20 years later. And there are still people that really prefer the more traditional liturgy, but it's not like an open warfare conflict like it was in the English Civil War. But there is a little bit of tension there. And today we're actually talking about revising the liturgy again to be more gender expansive.
How do you feel about that?
I'm all for it, like, if they do it right. That's kind of the thing. Like, that's a great thing in theory. I've seen trial liturgies along those lines. I like some things about them. I think some of them just kind of sound a little trite. I don't really agree with all the changes, but I think in general it's a noble goal.
So when you say that the Anglican Church does not have a pope, what is the ultimate authority in the Episcopalian Church?
Yeah, so in the Anglican Communion, it's made up of different provinces. So each country kind of gets its own Anglican Church. And the Anglican Communion does not enforce doctrine. The provinces enforce doctrine, and they just kind of talk about it at like communion meetings. So the highest authority in the Episcopal Church, actually, there's two of them. There's the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops. It's patterned kind of off of how the American government drafted the Constitution and like the legislative system of the American government. And so you have the bishops all like have their own house, and the House of Deputies is just like people from each parish in the Episcopal Church. And it's a pretty democratic process. And usually it doesn't define doctrine, but in the Episcopal Church, doctrine is very loosely defined anyways. We look to the Creed of Nicaea. We look to, in theory, the Bible, but obviously the Bible can be interpreted a lot of different ways.
Do you consider the Anglican Church to be closer to the mainstream Protestant churches or closer to the Roman Catholic Church?
That is an age-old question. Different Anglicans will give you different answers. I consider it closer to mainline Protestant churches. There are some Anglicans that, like I said, don't even consider the Anglican tradition to be a Protestant tradition, and its own separate tradition, more like the Catholic and Orthodox traditions than Protestants. I don't buy that. I'm a whole justification by faith alone, sola scriptura kind of person. So in that sense, I consider myself and my own spirituality very much in line with the mainline Protestants, and the Anglican tradition as a whole to share a lot of history and tradition with those traditions. But it also is very similar to the Catholic Church in a lot of respects. And some would even say that it's more similar to the Catholic Church than not.
Well, that's really interesting to hear you say that, because I guess when a lot of people see a Roman collar and a man dressed in black, they kind of think of a really strict, kind of dogmatic type of point of view. But what you're saying, that there's a lot of free room to explore your own ideas and even have a sola scriptura type of view, it's really interesting for the Anglican Church.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And just a little anecdote on the Roman collar. The Presbyterians invented it. The Catholics got it from Protestants.
Oh, really?
Yeah, actually. It was originally a Church of Scotland thing. But
that's incredible. I wonder what they wore before that. Was it just lay clothes or?
Mostly academic garb. And that's something that the Presbyterians shared with the Anglicans. as well. They mostly wore like academic robes and such.
When did the Presbyterians start?
Largely around the same time as the Church of England. Like I said, it kind of comes around with the English Civil War in its modern form, and like that Bishops' War. The Church of Scotland is where the Presbyterian Church comes from. And so really it starts with John Knox after like the Marian exiles and like Elizabeth I comes to the throne. John Knox goes back to Scotland from Geneva and reforms it along Calvinistic and Presbyterian lines. But I'm not a Presbyterian. I couldn't tell you their history quite as well. But that's really all I could tell you about that.
That's really interesting that the Presbyterian would go to Scotland to do it, and that's where Queen Mary was, right? I'm trying to get
So
my
that's a
history
different Mary. It's a different Mary, actually. There's Mary, Queen of Scots, and then there was Mary the First of England. They were both Catholic. You are right. It's
Elizabeth
confusing.
I was the Church of England.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Then she exiled Queen Mary and eventually executed her. Okay, so I'm getting my things mixed up. I'm getting my
It's really
history mixed up.
confusing. It's easy, yeah.
So how has your relationship with other Christians of other faiths been affected by being Anglican?
Well, obviously I wasn't Christian before I was Anglican, so it's improved a bit. So the Anglican tradition has kind of a bad rap in ecumenical circles because it's kind of impeded a lot of ecumenical dialogue because we kind of insist that other churches have like bishops if we want to like unite with them, either sacramentally or like outwardly, like in polity. But I've never been a fan with that. I actually just preached in a Baptist church today. That's what I was doing immediately before this. And we work a lot with the Catholics here on campus. We work a lot with like the Presbyterians here on campus. I mean, it really depends on where you're at, what kind of country you're looking at. Like in India, for instance, like the Anglican Church is just united with the Presbyterians, Methodists, and Baptists and whatever, and they just made one church. So like in certain places, like the Anglican tradition can get along really well with other churches. In some, it's less cordial, but I mean, it's cordial, but it's less friendly, I guess.
Do you consider yourself, quote unquote, in communion with other churches? Or is it kind of an exclusive church?
The Anglican churches, for the most part, would consider themselves in communion with a few different churches. So the Episcopal Church considers itself in communion with the Moravian Church of America, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, and then a few smaller ones. And the Anglican communion as a whole would consider it in communion with like the Old Catholic Church of Utrecht, like the Syrian Indian churches, and like Scandinavian Lutheran churches. But
would people of these churches be allowed to partake in communion at your church?
They would, yeah. And in general,
what about people of other forms of Christianity? A Baptist, would he be able to take communion at your church?
Yeah, he actually would. In the Episcopal Church, as long as you're baptized, you're allowed to commune in our church. The question of being in communion for us is more a question of like, can we like interchange ministers is a lot of what it comes down to. So like, could a Baptist celebrate the Eucharist in an Episcopal church? Technically, no. Canonically, we wouldn't allow for that, because there's a significant party in the Episcopal Church. I would say a Baptist can't celebrate the Eucharist at all. Like a Baptist minister just doesn't have that ability. I don't share that view. I actually just communed in a Baptist church hours ago. So I definitely don't hold that view, but it is a popular, probably majority view in the Episcopal Church. But anybody could come to our church and commune in our churches. Let me make that very clear.
That's interesting. So it's a much more inclusive church than other types of churches, ecumenical churches, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So like, yeah, absolutely anybody could commune in here as long as they're baptized. And really, a lot of churches have kind of just made a movement out of, you don't even have to be baptized to commune. But that's also a lively debate in the Episcopal Church. And technically the rules don't allow for that.
Does the Episcopal Church have like holy orders?
Yes. Yes. I wouldn't call them holy orders myself, but yes, we do have deacons, priests, and bishops. That's how we conceive of the holy orders. And there's different theological interpretations as to what the holy orders entail. And I guess I could get into that if you wanted me to, but.
If there was one thing that you wanted everyone to know about the Anglican Church that's uncommon or not very well understood, what would you like people to know?
Ooh, that's a really, that's a hard one. I would say that, the image of the Anglican churches around the world is mostly one of just like old liberal socialites, right? The wealthy upper crust of society just kind of getting together every Sunday, as if it were just like some kind of club meeting. And I would say that the Anglican tradition is much, 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 much deeper than that. I'd say that it has its own really distinct spirituality. It's a way of life, even. It's a way of prayer. And it really runs very deep. And I would say that, we don't really have issues, but we're working on them.
Well, this interview has really opened my eyes. I've learned a lot. Honestly, before this interview, I thought of Anglicanism simply as just Roman Catholicism with divorce, as I think a lot of people do. But this is interesting, that the Anglican Church has a very open mindset and a very inclusive
I will say
personality.
that's not true all around the world. In America, for sure. In Scotland, for sure. Canada, for sure. England, more or less. But if you go to like Africa, it very much isn't. It's a very conservative church in like Africa and Asia and South America. And that's a lot of the debates today is, on LGBT people and relationships. The African churches, South America, they're all called GAFCON, is kind of like the acronym for them. GAFCON really holds the view that no, that is not biblically sanctioned. We can't have that. And they don't even think they can commune with churches that do believe that. And so it's a lively debate, the role inclusivity plays in our church. But I'd say largely, very unfortunately, there's probably going to be a split worldwide on that issue. But in most of first world countries or whatever the better term for, I know that's not the right word anymore, but whatever the better term for that is, in these developed countries, I think, it usually tends to be that way, yes, but not necessarily worldwide.
But for the most part, the Anglican Church has a more kind of self-searching instead of practice what the church teaches.
Yeah, Jürgen Moltmann was not an Anglican theologian, but I think he really puts our mindset well. Talking about his own church. He says that the church has to be open to God, to the world, and to the future. It has to be willing to receive what will be sent by God, the world, and the future. And the Anglican Church, I think, does a really good job of trying to do that.
Well, that's fantastic. I really appreciate sitting down with you and talking today. I hope you have a great day.
Hey, yeah, you too, man. Thank you.